pharmaceutical industry. You're met with a gatekeeper who asks, well, what do you do, or what does your company do? Most salespeople would do something like this. Oh, I'm with XYZ company. We're a world-leading #1 company with this new type of drug called the XYZ drug that really helps your patients with their blah, 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 blah. Physicians all over the world are raving about it. In fact, we've been rated the #1 solution by doctors in your state the last 3 years in a row. When would Dr. Jones have 15 minutes where I can go over how we can help him save money, or something like that? This is what the average salesperson does when using traditional selling techniques. And I want you to consider what that means to the gatekeeper, or what that means to a prospect. Very little, if anything. It just means that you sound like everybody else, calling them every day to try to sell them something. You're going right into your solution without first finding out if they even have problems. And then what happens most of the time? The prospect or the gatekeeper might say, oh, we already have somebody for that. Or, I'm not sure the doctor is going to be interested. He told me that he's not open to any new changes for probably about 6 months. Maybe call back then. Or, the doctor's not in. He's on vacation. Call back in a week. Then you call back and nobody ever answers, right? And they give you all these excuses to try to get rid of you. See, if you want to be a top 1% earning salesperson, no matter the industry, you have to find out what's going to attract the prospect to you, okay? You don't want to tell people what you do, but how what you do helps other people that they can identify with. So I'm going to give you a different example, one that uses NEPQ instead of traditional selling techniques, okay? Now, in this example, let's say that you're in a completely different industry. Let's say that you're in the direct sales industry, okay? You're maybe in network marketing, and you recruit new distributors to your organization to sell products and services. You train tons in that industry as well. Prospect says, well, what do? You would say, well, what I do is, you know how a lot of people nowadays are finding it harder to get by with, all the corporate downsizing, the higher cost of living with all the inflation, and really the lack of high-paying job security? And as you nod your head, they're like, yeah. Well, what I do is I help people like that set up their own full or part-time businesses from home so they can start taking care of themselves financially and their families again. What do you do for work? What do you do for a living? Now, do you see how that better paints a picture of how what you do helps other people? Now, that response is more focused on 2 or 3 different challenges that most people can identify with. Higher cost of living with inflation, lack of high-paying job security. That's what most people talk about right now. So if you're in that industry, that would make sense to that prospect. Now, in other industries, obviously that wouldn't make sense. If you're talking to a doctor, you would obviously have a different personalized introduction. But it demonstrates that their purpose, your purpose, is to help other people do what? Solve their problems. Now, let's look at another example. Let's say in this example, you sell financial services. You're a financial advisor, and you mainly deal with high net worth investors or even institutions, okay? Prospect says, let's say you're at a trade show, or you're walking in a conference and say, what do you do for a living, George? Here's how that might look like, a personalized intro, if you're talking to more of a sophisticated high net worth investor. Now, if you're talking to somebody that's not very sophisticated, we're probably going to change this and lower it down a little bit, okay? Well, you know how a lot of high net worth investors are sometimes concerned with their investments because of all the, the volatility in the market, the up and down economic growth of the last few years, and really the Fed policy, increasing interest rates. So what we do is we have a proprietary investment blend that has more than a 20-year track record of paying our investors substantial returns. Most importantly, because of our unique financial structure, we're able to do that with really minimal risk. What do you typically invest in yourself? Or what type of investing are you primarily involved with? And now, it might not even be something for you, but what do you typically invest in with yourself? Or what do you typically invest in yourself? Now, if a prospect identifies with those problems, so in that first example, that's more network marketing, recruiting, and if they're finding it harder to get by because of inflation, if they're knowing about job downsizing that they see on the news, or they know someone who is, do you think they want to know more? Of course they will. And the second example, if the investor that you're talking to is concerned with the volatility of the market, if they want to protect their principal investments, if they're concerned about the Fed raising interest rates, which is going on during the time of this recording, you're absolutely going to get them in a two-way conversation where they want to know more details. See how easily that is, rather than saying, oh, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm in network marketing. Or what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a financial advisor. That means nothing to the prospect, okay? So here's another example from the home improvement industry. I'm just going to show you some different examples so you can plug in what you do. Same structure. So let's say in this example, you're in home improvement and you sell cabinet remodeling. We train thousands in that industry as well, okay? Here's how that might look like. And notice the structure, it's the exact same no matter what industry. So what do you guys do? Let's say you're a Tro Show. What do you guys do? So you know how a lot of homeowners sometimes get frustrated with the way the kitchen looks, especially, like your spouse. They don't like the way it functions for the family. And sometimes they feel like they don't have the proper atmosphere to really entertain family and guests. They don't want them over. As you nod like that. So what we do is we help people like that by redesigning the cabinets they already have so they can have that functionality for the family and atmosphere to entertain without having to do a complete tear out and gut job of the entire kitchen, which, as you know, takes months. What about you? How does your wife feel about your cabinets? Something like that, depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a husband, that would make sense. Now, let me give you an example if someone asked us what we do. Well, what we do is, you know how a lot of companies sometimes get frustrated by, like losing sales to low-cost competitors. Sometimes they're just concerned about their sales teams, like inconsistently hitting their targets, and a lot of times just worried about the lack of results from their people. So what we do is we help companies like that by learning how to use questions and certain techniques that work with human behavior, that cause prospects to pull them in, rather than against it, so they can hit their targets and stop losing so many sales that they really could be making. See how I did that? Okay, now it's your turn to build your own personalized introduction for what you sell. Let me give you the mechanics involved. Remember, a personalized intro consists of 3 parts: the problems, the solution, and then the question. So let's look at each one of these. The problem. You're going to start the reply with the phrase, "you know how," and then you're going to add 2 or 3 of the biggest generic problems with which your prospects could identify with. Needless to say, they need to be problems that your solution actually solves, all right? The new model salesperson looks at themselves to remember as what? Problem finders and problem solvers, not product pushers. So your job is to discover their problems, find out what's causing the problems, like the root cause. Okay, what is the root cause? And how are they being affected by that problem, even personally? So to create your own personalized intro, we have a worksheet for you to download at the end of this training. So that's your homework. Make sure you get that done as well, all right? Number 2, the solution. Let's talk about that. This is where you demonstrate how what you do helps people solve those challenges. And the key here is to use very simple language. Don't go overboard. Just be somewhat generic here. Start with, well, what we do is we help people like that, or what we do is we help companies like that, depending on who you sell to, and then continue how your solution solves those problems. Keep that short and simple. Do not make that 2 paragraphs. It's going to sound long-winded and salesy. The question. Here you ask, this is number 3, here you ask a question that turns the focus back onto the other person to explore and uncover what problems they have and how you can actually help them. I'm curious, what do you guys invest in yourself? Or what does your portfolio possibly look like if you sold financial services? That's just an example. Asking this type of question immediately puts the focus right back on your prospect instead of yourself. Because if you just stop after you say that, they're like, well, how do you do that? Or what does that mean? And then they start peppering with questions and you have no control. I want to preface something. The personalized intro is not meant to sell them, all right? It's just meant to make them want to engage in a 2-way conversation to see where that goes. Okay, now we're done with this training and it's time for you to download the personalized worksheet. Now, I highly recommend that you take 10 to 15 minutes to develop your personalized intro with that worksheet. Now, just remember, okay, the personalized intro you typically will only use in a cold calling situation, which we'll show you that in a second, not at the beginning, but after what's called a problem statement, and to use when somebody asks you what you do for a living. You're not going to call an outbound lead or inbound lead and use a personalized intro most of the time. Okay, let's go into the next training. We're going to talk about cold calling and how to do that without triggering sales resistance. See you soon.